And I'm fucking livid that we are stuck in the timeline where Alex Jones is right. Kind of worse than it was.
Oh no! Oh, okay, no.
Why aren't the Amish afraid of COVID? Because they don't have TVs.
As I said, democracy is a system that reinforces authoritarian ideals.
I hope I don't get canceled. Talk to Steve.
Being a victim of a tragedy doesn't make you an expert in public policy.
Well, I mean, AOC is a drama queen and she's full of shit.
Remember, they lost the Afghan war 10 years ago.
You brought a freaking guillotine.
They said, you don't get to tell us no, we're the state health department, and I said, hell no.
It wasn't making Christianity better, it was making rock worse.
What the fuck do you have on your face, Olivia?
You want to make the world a better place? Have some babies and raise them to not be stupid.
I remember thinking, man, governments are not going to like this shit.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, activists, shitposters, anarchists, and people of the internet, thanks for tuning in to another episode of O'Donnell for Liberty. As always, I'm your host, Justin. Before we get started, just remember, whatever platform you listen on, whether YouTube Live, Odyssey, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, or on LRN.FM, you can help grow the show by liking, commenting, subscribing, and sharing with your friends. If you enjoy the content, you can head over and join our production team on Patreon at patreon.com/O'Donnell for Liberty. Again, that's patreon.com/O'Donnell, the number 4, Liberty. And make sure to check out snackswag.com for all your favorite Liberty merch, including some brand new designs for t-shirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, tote bags, stickers, and more. That's snackswag.com. You can check it out, the awesome collection of hoodies, right in time for colder weather this winter. If you want to keep in touch between shows, follow me on social media and join our community Discord channel where you can chat with other fans of the show at any time. All these links can be found in the description of the video or podcast you're listening to, as well as on o'donnellforliberty.com. So check the description, grab that link, and give it a visit today. Tonight, we're going to talk about the ongoing debate about property rights and homelessness, and how would we treat homeless people in a libertarian society, and how can we deal with homelessness as an issue in modern society while upholding our libertarian values, or, as my guest termed it, anarcho-bummism. Joining me tonight, the Liberty Movement's favorite bug boy, Magnus Panvidya. Magnus, how's it going?
Yeah, it's perfect that we're talking about homelessness. I mean, we both look like fucking homeless people tonight. It's great.
Right? It's fucking awesome. So I've been getting Tim Pool comments because I've been wearing my beanie because it's cold. We finally got cold weather here in New Hampshire.
Oh yeah, there's snow outside. I know. Apparently, according to Liberty Twitter, everyone lives in San Francisco, according to how they talk about this, but some of us don't.
I love the cold. The cold weather is my favorite time of the year. But it seems almost like clockwork when the cold weather comes around, when we finally get the cold weather, that's when people start to have a problem with the homeless people.
Yeah. It's almost like there's a connection to that.
It's some kind of crazy connection. And I do a lot of work with the Free State Project and trying to get libertarians and anarchists to move to New Hampshire and for like our great cause of like condensing as many people as we can and consolidating in one place so we can actually have political power to protect our freedoms and help each other. But one of the things people don't talk about all that often that's kind of a valid criticism of New Hampshire is our housing scarcity problems, the lack of affordable housing, and the fact that we have one of the highest and fastest growing homeless populations per capita in the world in New Hampshire. And we've seen like varying responses from libertarians that run the gambit from like, we need to help these people, we need to step up and show that charity can help people and charity can fix these problems, so we don't need to rely on government, to the other end of libertarianism where homelessness makes my property value go down, so we need to use the state that exists to remove the homeless people.
Yeah, and I took particular umbrage to this. It isn't even really the broad kind of idea that Tho Bishop and Dave Smith put forward, more so the contextualization around it and how people talk about the issue kind of exposes their sheer ignorance to that community, the causes of it, and the type of people that find themselves in there. And it came across as a lot of people genuinely believe that the vast majority of homeless people are drug addicted assholes that are shooting up heroin in the public park, which is statistically inaccurate, which is morally inaccurate. And, It just
I believe
preaches ignorance to me, and that makes me kind of set me off. And then like I had that big post that kind of went a little bit viral of like I was homeless and I was that bum that was selling fucking marijuana out of the back of a car at a public park, and that's the only reason I didn't starve to death. So like I take particular umbrage to a lot of this shit.
Well, I think it's more along the lines intellectually deficient and intellectually dishonest, because at the same time, libertarians have no problem recognizing that one of the root causes of homelessness is the economic pressures that are put on people that are created by the state and created by monetary policy. And libertarian ideas are great about fixing that. It just comes to how do we deal with it in the meantime? And everyone's like, oh, they're worthless bums. I'm like, okay, but your own policies preach that they're not worthless bums, that they're victims largely of an economic system that oppresses people.
Yeah, and the idea, like, because Ace kind of sparked this whole debate about the tragedy of the commons and who owns the park and blah, blah, blah. And you saw literally hundreds of people that have the little fucking LP flame in their bio or whatever be like, the homeless people are not taxpayers. And that was the first thing that cued me off, that these people have no idea what the hell they're talking about.
I don't want to be a taxpayer.
Well,
like,
for one, yeah. That's that hilarious thing. But to the other thing of it shows their ignorance, because if you look it up, there is studies in almost every major urban center that are put forward by the shelters, that are put forward by nonprofits, that are put forward by the government themselves, that show on average across this country, anywhere between 25 to 65% of the people that are homeless are either part or full-time employed. So these people are paying taxes, they have a job, but the economic situation in their area is so screwed up, or their life is so screwed up, or they have so many negative interactions with the police that they are in this situation. The biggest example they brought up, I think it was a study in Seattle that showed that like I think 15% of the Uber drivers in Seattle live out of their car because that's their only job, and they don't make enough money to afford an apartment. So they literally drive people around all day and then go park their car somewhere and sleep in the back of it. Like,
I don't think that's even relegated to just like lower income people and like the lower middle class and Uber drivers and gig workers. There was an article that I remember reading not long ago about a massive homeless camp of people living out of trucks and vans in a parking lot outside of like Google and Silicon Valley, because programs and people making six figures a year couldn't afford to live in the Bay Area.
Yeah, you see that with video game developers all the time, especially a lot of the California-based video game developers, that you'll have these people working for like EA and these big video game companies that are living out of their vehicle or sleeping in a tent, in a public park, yet they go to a public bathroom, clean themselves up, and then go to work. And that's the main thing is like, I agree to an extent that like we probably shouldn't, as a society, be acceptable with a guy, shitting on a public park slide and then going under the bleachers and shooting up heroin. That's not the issue. The issue is we're talking about homeless people. We're not talking about, drug addicts or dangerous people. We're talking about the entire class of homeless people. And when you blow it up to that and you say, what do we do about the homeless people? Because that's what started this conversation. It wasn't, what do we do about drug addicts, or what do we do about, mental health issues. No, it was literally broadly, what do we do about homeless people? That's where it kind of screws up for me. And the particular idea of, we'll just remove them, that is the most non-solution ever to me, because it operates on a faulty premise that I do not understand, that people don't get. And from someone who's been homeless, I can tell you this is how the world works. These people don't evaporate when you move them. And in fact, the idea of removing the homeless is so common that you can find stories of city governments literally loading dozens and dozens of people on buses and just driving them to the next city. And then they're at that next city and they're living like bums, and then they get arrested and they get put on a van, and then they're sent to San Francisco, who then sends them to LA, who then sends them to Las Vegas, who then sends them to Austin, and they just cart each other's homeless people around in a circle.
We have that problem right here in New Hampshire, and it's just two cities that do it. It's Manchester and Concord. And it seems like every few years it's in the news about how homeless camps have gotten so big, they've become a nuisance, they're a problem, they're an eyesore on the river, because we do have a beautiful river that runs through downtown Manchester with the business district right on the river, and the homeless people will put their camps in the wood line. And I've gone down there fishing before, or on hikes and walks, and I came across a camp that was beautiful, and I'm like, I wouldn't mind living here for a summer. Like, they've done it up so nice, but people get so upset about it, and they send in bulldozers to bulldoze these camps. They put people on bus and send them to Concord, and then 2 years later, Concord has a problem, and they rally the troops. They get the tax money spent to bulldoze the camps, put everyone on a bus, and send them back to Manchester. And it's just a cycle that we've had. But every time it happens, the mayor celebrates that she's cured the homeless problem.
Yep. I mean, like I said in my story, I was homeless in Petoskey, Michigan for several months. First, I was sleeping in the state park. They kicked me out of the state park, so I was sleeping in the city park. They kicked me out of the city park. I was in the woods behind a church. They told the church we weren't allowed to stay there. I went back to the national park. Like, you know, I don't disappear. These people, you know, you can't just. That's why people are like, well, what is your solution? I'm like, well, the first start is to stop pretending that just shoving your clothes under your bed is doing your laundry. Like, because that's the argument that's being made here, is we just remove them and then they're gone and I don't have to deal with them. It's like, okay, well, now the next street over has to deal with it. The next city over has to deal with it. And then they're going to come back to you. And it's ignorant. It's stupid to me. And you're right. There is very like NIMBY attitude behind it. And you also just see a lot of stupid arguments to me of some person quote tweeted me and they were telling this story about like, oh, my neighborhood used to be so good. And then there was homeless people. And then sometimes the homeless people started fighting. And then all of a sudden there was like a spree of gunshots. And this is why homeless people are bad. And I'm like, oh, so it was the homeless people that were getting into gunfights, not like gangs or
Right.
like, you know, the homeless people own firearms and are getting, no, that's not who. And you see the same thing with the trash of like, all the homeless people are dirty. And it's like, yeah, a lot of homeless people are like, you know, fucking litter bugs. But guess who else is litter bugs? Everyone else who lives in a city, you know. So it's like,
Right.
It's like you're taking these urban problems, these urban decay problems, and you're blaming them exclusively on the homeless, and that's also just false, you know, nonsense. The guy who snatches up a little girl and tries to kidnap her in his vehicle gets blamed on the homeless population, where the homeless population isn't the people owning a car, you know, like
Right.
you see all these leaps of logic, this very boomer con fucking, you know.
Well, with some of the leaps of logic, and one of the things I do love about the liberty movement and the liberty community is that, like, when we're preaching our philosophy, when we're talking about libertarianism and we're making our elevator pitches, when we encounter problems that we don't have the answer to, people are real quick to say, we don't have the answer. Like, we don't know yet. We need to figure it out. And whereas Republicans and Democrats, conservatives and authoritarians, they always say the answer is the state. The state will figure it out. The state will do something. But I feel like this debate this time has kind of reached the we don't know the answer stage, where libertarians don't know the answer to how to deal with it. Like, is it private property? Is it commons? Is it a minimal government? Is it state action? Is it private charitable action? In your post, you talked about how the church was more than willing to let you guys stay and camp in the woods behind the church. They had no problem with that. And most churches wouldn't, because that's one of their core tenets is charity and caring for those in need. But then the state came in and told the church they weren't allowed to let you.
Yep. And another thing, this is damning to me for a lot of people, because when I bring this up, you see light bulbs go off in people's heads because they've never considered this before. But, you know, I'm a little bit more of a mutualist. I'm considered a little bit more left than people, but like I also like lean on don't fuck with people's property. And the whole ANCAP libertarian argument is property rights are human rights, that all rights spawn on some version of property rights. So where are you battling? Why are you not dying on the hill of the idea that cops can come to somebody who has a tent on a public park and take their clothes, their phone charger, the money they have, their tent, all of that, confiscate it and destroy it? Is it not private property because it's not on a federally acknowledged tax-paying parcel of land? Is that not their stuff? So why are you okay with the cops destroying it? Because you can, you know, like you said, they bring bulldozers. You see it all the time. They like, and tents aren't cheap. And like I said, you'll be surprised what a lot of people these had. I brought up as well that our little encampment that we had on the national park was raided by the police. I had $200 in a little like tiny key safe, you know, like you could steal it easily and break into it easily, but it's all I had. I had $200 in that. I had a phone charger. I had a bunch of clothes. I had winter clothing, everything. I had all stored in my tent, and they just took all of that. I had no recourse. I had no right to demand that back. That's my property that I worked for and that was helping me get out of that situation of homelessness. And you see the cops do this all the time. They'll take people's phones. They'll like all these tools that might make people getting out of homelessness easier. The police usually are the ones that take that shit, destroy that shit, fuck with those people. And then you're going to turn around and be like, well, the solution is the cops.
Yeah, it's but like at what point, like the cops are a solution. It's not a good solution. It's not a good solution at all. But if your concern is about your property and you don't want them there, and you're like the commons or something you recognize as partially your property, at what point is this a failure of libertarian philosophy? At what point is this a failure of property rights? Nick Ashley actually had a great post that he pointed out. And I think it was a great post coming from the other side of this argument.
Yeah, I didn't see it because he has me blocked in just telling people that I'm a federal agent. So,
well, it was a great post, I think, in kind of dispelling the notion of at what point does your property rights end and what point does your property rights start? Because all he did was take a picture of the curb at the end of his driveway, and he colored the driveway red and the street green. He says, the red is my property, the green is not my property. Do I have the right to tell someone camping on the green on the edge of my property, causing a nuisance to me, to leave, even though they're not on my property?
Under libertarianism, no. Under property rights, no. Well, see, those kind of fallings are why I don't identify as a libertarian. So it's like, you know, like
right. But it's an interesting question to ask from a property rights perspective. Like, does actions taken on not your property that hinder your enjoyment of your property violate your property rights?
Yeah, and that's the black hole of the NAP, as I call it. It is people like to think it's a absurd criticism of the NAP of like, oh, well, my neighbor started planting flowers and I'm deathly allergic to them, so I have a right to drop a nuke on their house. And people are like, that's absurd. And I'm like,
not really. Like,
if you're the person that wakes up every morning and can't breathe, is it? You know, like so that you get into really squirrely territory there. And yeah.
Hey, I mean, I've had arguments where we have a smoker every once in a while. Me and some friends will throw a barbecue and we'll do like a 6-7 hour smoke of some pig roasts and chicken on the smoker. And that produces a lot of noxious smoke that goes up. And in the neighborhood, we live in a city. I can legally smoke there. The neighbors around where we smoke have come to terms with it over the past year and a half that we've been doing it.
That's a nice way to put it. Come to terms.
but like it hasn't happened. But the thoughts occurred to me is like, what if the neighbor comes out and the neighbor comes out is every once in a while check, are you guys burning? I'm like, yeah, we're gonna be doing it for like 12 hours. Like, okay, cool, walks away. But what if it was like, what the hell, guys? Like, my daughter has really bad asthma and this is making it hard for her to breathe.
Yeah. Would that not be considered a NAP violation? And then you're going to get into a 300 quote tweet thread with Ace, you know, trying to explain whether this, and it's, you know, like I said, I had this comment on Pete Quinhoda's, I always mispronounce his last name. So again, sorry, Pete, if I'm fucking it up, but, where I bring up that every single ideology has its black hole. It has its squirrely little bit it can't explain. Mutualism has in-use property, ANCAPs have the NAP, Marxists have personal versus private property. Like, these are black holes that you could have infinite debates over and nobody can figure out. And that's why there is no ideological purist argument for humanity, because humanity is complicated and there's details like this where things are going to fall through the cracks. So I actually do appreciate Nick's comment on that of like, yeah, you can't just point to, you know, like a lot of people are doing, which I think is really clownish of like, well, Rothbard said. I was like, okay, well, Rothbard's dead. All right. And the world's, you know, Rothbard lived in one part of the world and one part of thing. And even if his ideas are really good, it isn't universal. In the same way, you could say the same shit about Marx, you say the same shit about fucking, you know, has any philosopher. Like, humanity is messy, which is the whole reason why I'm like the anarchist without adjectives and like we'll figure it out type people. Is there is no rigid ideological structure that's going to solve all the world's problems.
The question is, how do we solve this problem? Like, we know the true anarchist, even the true anarcho-capitalist, anarcho-mutualist, anarcho-socialist, any anarchist with whatever adjective they want is going to say that private charity and community is the way to solve these. The people's communities will take care of them and keep them from becoming homeless. And that it's the power structures and the economic hierarchies that we have that are creating the systems that are disparaging people and creating homelessness. But what do we do now? Like, how do you stay principled to your anarchist or libertarian ideals and deal with the homeless issue now?
I like the two things I have to say about that is the first thing is there is no national answer. Why people are homeless in New Hampshire is different than why people are homeless in California, is different than why people are homeless in Florida. Like, there is no like magic bullet, which I think a lot of people fall into, of like it's a very statist thing, which is why it pisses me off when libertarians do it, of like there are local solutions, there might even be state solutions, but there are no national or global solutions to any problem because it's too complicated. But on the local level, like I do believe that it is like people have to step up and they have to do the private thing as much as possible and try to like do the charity work and all of that, even if it's illegal, even if you get in trouble, even if you go to jail for it, because the saturation is the problem. There's always been homeless people. There's always been the story of Crazy John who sits outside the liquor store and gets blackout drunk and yells at kids every time they go in the store. Like, that's been that way since the 40s and even before that. The problem is the saturation. The saturation comes from this bullshit, you know, like it's 100 people camping by the river, not that there always has been one or two. That's the problem. And the saturation comes from these Democrat policies, comes from the Nimby Republicans and all of that. And that you have to fight against. And the reason why, like, you know, people will be like, well, that doesn't solve the issue now. Well, just like I said before, removing them doesn't solve the issue at all. It just, you know, pushes it on to somebody else. And then someone else has to deal with that. So unless like you're arguing arrest people for being homeless, then you're just sweeping the dust around in a circle in your fucking apartment. You know, like, it's not a solution. Stop pretending it. And if you want to go into the homeless should be forcibly detained and put somewhere or whatever, that's a whole nother moral rabbit hole.
I don't think it's a moral rabbit hole. I think it's just straight up immoral. Like, penalizing and criminalizing bad circumstances, criminalizing and penalizing like poor outcomes is not good. But either way, like, it's nothing libertarians I think should be considering, because the end result of that is you having to pay more taxes to house them.
Right. And like there is infinite stories. There's almost like one every single day of a church having its charity shut down, of a shelter being raided, of a shelter taking money from the government and using it and stealing it essentially and using it for something besides helping the homeless. I always bring up the great example of the guy in California that was building mobile showers and hooking them up to his truck and essentially driving them around. I think it was either San Francisco or LA. And he was giving homeless people, like, you jump in this free shower, take a shower, wash yourself up, shave, and, you know, so you can have a better chance of getting a job and feel better about yourself. The city government shut it down, confiscated that property, and destroyed them. You have other examples of people making like micro homes and stuff like that. So these people can all like live in a more out of sight way that makes people more comfortable. The city confiscates that and destroys that. So like, to me, it's, you know, to kind of weaponize the Hoppians against themselves. It's high, you know, it's very high time preference behavior of like, well, instead of going after these, you know, institutionalized fucking evil, oppressive organizations that are making the situation impossible to resolve, we're going to take the short-term solution and just shove it under the rug. And then, you know, I can go on Twitter and be like, yeah, the churches should be able to house homeless people, and then watch some Netflix and go to sleep and not have to do anything. Because that's my biggest criticism of kind of the modern libertarian movement is, and the whole reason I even came to prominence was I was demanding people go out and do libertarian shit. Like the entire conceit of the kind of school of thought of anarchism and libertarianism is, well, who will build the roads? I will. Who will take care of the homeless? I will. To where it seems like there's a new kind of thing that really is like, well, I just want to be left alone. Well, it's like, well, what about these problems? Well, I'm going to remove them and push them out of sight, and I don't have to care, and I want to be left alone. And sure, like philosophically and morally, you are entitled to do that, you know? but we're not the same kind of people. Like, you know,
and I
I
get both ends. I get both ends of it. Like when somebody asked me one time, like I was tired, and it was after a good bit of a psychedelic experience at this wonderful festival up in the mountains, and somebody asked me, it's like, what do you think true freedom is? And the only answer I had was like being left alone and not having responsibilities. Like true freedom is if I had a cabin up in the woods with a 4G internet connection and was self-sustaining and didn't have responsibility to anyone else and could just be me, that'd be perfect. That'd be great. But I live in a major city. That's not the reality that I have in front of me. And that's in order to get to that reality, there's a lot of stuff to wade through.
Right. And that's why I fall more towards the mutualistic side of things. I don't believe that you should be forced or you should be coerced into caring about the world and people and the problems and your neighbors and everything like that. But I do morally view isolationists as not like respectable people. So that's why I'm a mutualist. You know, power to you. I will never stick a gun in your head, gun against your head and tell you to go feed the homeless. But again, like, I don't consider us the same type of libertarian. I consider like the whole thing that got me even to associate with the circle of people were people like Adam Kokesh and stuff like that are like, I'm trying to save the world and the government is stopping me. You know, like that's what brought it to me, to where there's a whole different chain of people that are like, I'm trying to grill and I have to pay taxes and I'm upset about it. It's like, okay, like power to you, homie. But I'm a different line of thinking on all this.
Well, I mean, Adam is kind of transcended to that point too. Like Adam Kokesh went from being one of the preeminent anti-war activists who brought in people like myself and a lot of people I know from the military into the liberty movement, who was out there in the streets, in the face of the state, constantly fighting, never exactly directly helping people, just kind of bringing attention to things, to now he's got his compound in the desert and just wants to be left alone. But he's doing shit and giving people a place to stay, a place to work, and helping people get on their feet in Adam's compound out in the desert. And he's kind of made that transition. Seamus brings something up in the live chat. Remember what the state did to River Dave this year? Now, I'm not sure if you're aware of this. This was a very, very local New Hampshire issue. And I'd love your take on this.
Oh, I have a feeling where what the story is going to be about. I have no context, whatever, and I just have a gut intuition.
So there's this guy Dave. We call him River Dave, and for
assuming River Dave lived by the river
on private property for 40 plus years.
Did he own the property, or was he allowed by the property owner?
He was allowed by the property owner. For 40 plus years, the property owner had no problem, no care. Dave improved upon the property. He built himself not a shack, not a tent, not a hut or a lean-to, a full-blown home. Homemade solar panel setup, homemade power setup, completely off-grid, and it was like a gorgeous little cabin in the woods. Then the property got sold. Dave was not made aware of the sale of the property. The previous owner had died, and the trust that held his property had went and sold the property. The new owner was unaware that Dave was on the property. The new owner, when having a survey done of their new property, found Dave's home and had Dave evicted by state agents who came in and burned down Dave's home.
Probably not allowing Dave to get anything out of it either.
Well, the fire is under mysterious circumstances. Nobody knows what happened because Dave was in custody while he was being charged with criminal trespass when the fire happened.
Yeah, that's great.
But it was within the new owner's property rights to evict Dave. But at what point did Dave have a claim to that property after having been there for 40 years with no opposition?
Yes, that's the mutualist argument, because the Rothbardian argument is very contract law. So this owner has the contract, has a deed to the property, he owns it. The mutualist argument is, well, River Dave has used this property for 40 years. Right. So I don't give a fuck what government approved piece of paper says this isn't Dave's property. This is Dave's goddamn property. So that's kind of how I come at it. Because there's another example of that. I think it was in Minnesota. I'm going to fuck up where it's at, and I'll probably fuck up details of the story. But there was a guy who had lived on this piece of land that was unowned. I think like a bank held it or something like that for like 30 years or something. and he had like a mobile home on it and everything like that, and he was like living out there. And then the bank finally sold the property to someone, and they went there and they just kicked this dude off and like bulldozed his shack. And I'm like, okay, fuck you. Like, I don't know. Like, I maybe I'm in the wrong there. Maybe my mutualism is stupid commie bullshit, but I think that's wrong.
So, I mean,
You
there
know?
are some state solutions here and some state laws that have rules about adverse possession. And I remember reading an article about a guy. It was a black guy, and that was of note because he was trying to adversely possess a bank-owned house in a very, very wealthy white neighborhood, and there was a lot of like racist commentary getting thrown around with the homeowners association, where the previous owner of the property had abandoned the property. They'd abandoned their mortgage because they could no longer afford it after the crash, and the bank held the deed, the bank held the mortgage, but wasn't able to sell the property because it wasn't in demand. So this guy just moved in, started improving the property, lived there, made it 15 years. And then after, under Texas state law, just went down to the deed office and filed for the deed. No mortgage. He's adversely possessed the home because nobody kicked him out for 15 years.
Yeah. And that's beneficial. It sucks that it's the state, but again, that there is solutions to this, and we can figure it out. It's just going to be messy because you're hitting the crossroads of a lot of dubious shit. And especially when it comes to the homeless issue, you're as someone who's been homeless and someone who is very involved in like helping homeless people and people in the community and everything like that, you are stuck between a rock and a hard place. And a lot of people don't realize this, that you obviously have like the conservative NIMBY types that just want them the fuck gone. Yep. And you know, are okay with like the church being shut down for feeding homeless people and everything like that. But on the opposite side, you have the college Marxists that will oppose giving homeless people jobs because that's exploitation.
Yeah.
So it is a war to get anything like this done at all. Like
I think the worst is every hurricane season we see this one come up. Every hurricane season, the moment the first hurricane barrels toward Texas, we see memes going around of Joel Osteen's mega church with their doors locked and a sign says no loitering and nobody's allowed in. That's because Texas state law prohibits the church from housing the homeless. And the people making that complaint, it's like, why isn't this church taking care of the homeless? It's like, it's a mega church with millions of dollars. Why aren't they taking care of the homeless? It's like, because you elected people who made it illegal for the church to take care of the homeless.
Right. And those are insane things because like when it comes, because everything's local solutions to me, that's all that matters. I don't give a fuck who the president is. I don't care who your senator is, whatever. These are all local solutions. Right now, wherever you're living, whatever borough of New York or like, you know, suburb of Philadelphia or whatever, you can walk in and you can demand ballot access for a bill that makes it where you are legally allowed to have homeless people live on your property. You can go do that right now as a libertarian, and you can campaign for it and you can do it. And you don't have to win an election. You just have to win a single issue ballot on this one thing. Can we change this one law? And we are very successful on that with no-knock raids. We're very successful on that with qualified immunity, whatever, these single issue things. This should be like weed decriminalization. This is the shit where we fucking crush on it every single time. The LP is like actually worth a damn when it comes to these kind of bills. And yet, where's the discussion for that? You know, like it's like, what do we do? What do we do? It's like, okay, there's one thing you could do right now, next November, and you could get this on a ballot or whatever, and you can go advertise for it. Because when you walk up to almost anybody, it comes from a place of ignorance. They're like, wait, what do you mean a church is not allowed to feed the homeless people? And then they find out about it and they get mad, you know, because it's just one of those things that we do in this country that people don't understand we do, you know? So there's a solution for you right there. You want to start there.
There's another story of an old pastor in Florida.
I know this one.
Yeah, just in and out of jail his entire, like he's a retired pastor who has spent his retirement.
Ancient fucking man. If you would look up pictures of this dude, he's literally like this.
Yeah, 90 years old, and he's been in and out of jail for 10 years because the moment he gets out of jail, every time he celebrates by throwing a feed the homeless party, and then gets arrested for illegally feeding the homeless.
Yeah. And like you like a lot of, especially because like I understand that there is a class of the homeless that are mentally perturbed or just genuinely gross, disgusting people. They exist, and I'll never decline that. But your ability to identify them from the working family that has a part-time housekeeping job but lives in a tent in an alleyway because that's all mom can do, your ability to separate them will increase the more you just knock these issues out. And also people will slip into that less. So you get these, another thing I always bring up is a lot of the food regulation that makes it to where when I was younger, it was like we would, as kids, just go to 7-Eleven at closing time and we would get all of the free food because they would throw it away anyways. And, the company had no problem with it. And then they released regulation making that illegal. So they can't do that. So yeah, maybe that homeless guy is begging for heroin, but the person next to him might be begging for food. And if that person can get free food, then okay, the only person begging anymore is the person who wants heroin. And now we can separate these two classes of people, like.
No, I remember I used to work at Cumberland Farms when I was younger, and I got in trouble for working. I worked the overnight shift, and at 3 a.m. every night, I had to empty the donut case and throw out all the old donuts. And so the new ones could be put up for the next day. And I got in trouble for giving them to the homeless people.
Yeah, because there's regulations against it. And there's a ability for people to sue the company, and there's also civil liability for that and everything, and all of that comes from freaking NIMBY shit that we can fight. That we can start knocking these off, all this NIMBY shit one at a time, but that requires work. That requires you to do something. Ali put out a great tweet, and I think it sums up so many things where it's like, well, what is your solution? And it's like, well, here's a solution. It's like, well, no, that requires me as an individual to do something. No, who can I tell to solve this problem for me? It's like, no one. No one's coming to help you. Get that in your fucking head. No one's going to solve these problems.
So I think a lot of the problem people have is, like, you've hit the nail on the head, is separating, like, realizing that not everybody who's homeless is homeless because they're a useless bum and a drug addict. Like, a lot of people, there's a lot of reasons, ranging from economic hardship, from just bad circumstances, to mom lost her job, to mental health that puts people on the streets. And all of these are things that we as a society should be working to help people with, to better people for. And, like, sure, it could get to the point where, like, if we were providing those services privately and there was charities that were taking care of the people who had mental health issues, who were helping people get back on their feet economically and stay in homes through economic struggles, and that was all being handled privately without the government, and we still had a handful of bums out there begging for heroin, I'd have a whole lot less of a problem with the Nick Ashleys kicking them off their property.
Right, exactly. Like, because then we've gotten to the point where we can start going by individual basis on the, like, what these people are doing. And yeah, like the guy that smells like dog shit that sleeps inside the monkey gym, whatever, and like traumatizes your children. Okay, yeah. We know what's going on there. We know that this guy hasn't been denied help everywhere, or been raped in a shelter, or robbed by the cops, or any of this horrible fucked up shit that happens to the homeless people all the time. We just know that he's a piece of shit. Okay, we can treat him like a piece of shit, and we can move on. That's kind of my thing about it, is like, let's narrow down human suffering till we get to just the losers.
I think a lot of that's just lived experience and taking the time to actually, like, investigate and learn. Me, myself, I used to have the same preconceptions. I used to get really annoyed by the homeless people. When I lived and worked in Boston, it was awful. I hated them. They'd be sitting in the McDonald's freaking vestibule. They'd always be begging. They'd follow you. And I just assumed they were all bums looking for drugs. One time I actually gave a guy like $100 bill. I was out in the night partying with friends. There was a bachelor party and we were going nuts. And a guy had a sign, "Need money for drugs and alcohol." I'm like, hey, he's the first honest homeless guy I've ever seen. And I shouldn't have given him money. But I did, because at that point, I thought that's all homeless people were. And, like, he was the only one to be honest.
You know what the fucked up part about that is that guy probably genuinely didn't spend that money on drugs and alcohol. But that's just like the game. Like, there's a whole fucking meta around begging, dude. Like, that's why, but I have a problem with it. But a lot of homeless people will adopt dogs because they know that if they have a dog, people will give them money. And I don't think it's cool to put an animal in that situation. Right. But, like, there's a whole game around this shit.
But there was a point, like, when I was in college, I lived on Cape Cod, down in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, and there was a homeless woman who was a regular, like you knew her. She was at the same 4 gas stations every day, and she was just constantly walking back and forth. She walked 30 miles a day. That was, you could tell by where you saw her in the morning, where you saw her at night, and she'd make the same walk back the next day. And it was just constant and repeated. And she was dirty, she was smelly, she was mean, she would curse at you, she would chew you out, blah, blah, blah. I'd give her a cigarette every now and then, she'd go, give me a cigarette, you got a cigarette? And just to shut her up and get her away. And it, like, after living there for 4 years, I remember my senior year of college, it was like a headline, front page news the next day that she had died. Like, and everybody cared that she had died. She got hit by a car on her walk. And she left $30 million to the local homeless shelter.
You don't know shit about people. You don't know shit about.
She was
people.
bipolar. She was schizophrenic. Like, off her meds. Like, they listed out the mental health issues that she'd been institutionalized for throughout her life. But her family was money, old Cape Cod rich money, and she had no family at that point, and no one else to take care of her, and ended up on the streets. Even though she had all the resources in the world, she didn't know how to use them to help herself.
And that's a lot of cases with people. You have a local story in Detroit of you saying walking reminds me. This guy walked all the way. I think it was from he lived in East Side Detroit, and I think he walked all the way to Dearborn, which is like it's like 2.5 hours or something like that walk. He did this every single day. He was squatting in an abandoned building in Detroit, and he was going to work. This guy worked a full-time job, like decent money. It wasn't like a big down. I think it was in like demolition or construction or something like that. So this guy's making like $15, $20 an hour, living in an abandoned house, walking like 2.5 hours each direction to go to work. And it was a big deal when he finally got, somebody gave him a car. And now that guy has a house and he's not homeless anymore just because someone gave him a car, you know? So, and that's like when I say,
well, in this used car market, that's a big deal.
Yeah. And that's why I say like solutions are going to be very locally dependent, because Northern Michigan, for example, the biggest issue up there is lack of transportation, because Michigan insurance is insane. Like I said in that post, like you're talking like $200 to $250 for PLPD because of Detroit, and like half the people in Detroit don't have licenses or insurance. So that makes the insurance go up even more. And it's very spread out rural community. So you're going to have to drive at least 30 minutes, if not more, to go to work. So if you don't have a car and you don't have friends that are willing to drive you, you're going to starve. And there isn't no public transportation or homeless shelters or anything like any of that urban infrastructure to take care of you. So a lot of these people will go full fucking Ted Kaczynski and go wander off into the woods and like live in a tent. So what would solve, you know, the homeless issue in your area would not solve the homeless issue in my area, you know? And then like you go into places like California where you have a whole bunch of essentially homeless tourists that go there for like, you know, you have I'm going to become a Hollywood star. And then I've been here for 4 months and got alcoholism and lost all my money. And now I'm trapped in California. Like there's a lot of that. So like what will solve the problem here ain't going to solve the problem there either. So yeah, shit's hard and there's no easy answers. I hate to break it to you.
The point, like transportation being such a big issue and such a crux on like moving forward and getting out of an economic rut, like people don't realize that's one of the biggest reasons why homeless people gravitate to cities.
Yeah,
that is because everything's there. They don't need to rely on walking 2.5 hours, getting a ride, finding a cab, finding a bus that'll let them get a free ride somewhere, hoping they can catch a train. Like the Christopher McCandlesses of the world don't exist anymore. Like that's fantasy for like the happy hobo that makes his way across the country in modern times. Like you can't hitchhike across this country anymore. People
there's no social trust and you'll likely get arrested.
Right.
So it's fun. But I like how Reed talked about that, like how like his story of hitchhiking and everything, and like almost all of it was like everything was cool, and then we got fucked with by the cops, and then everything was cool, and then we got fucked with by the cops.
Right. But like transportation is the thing, and a lot of the people, like the same like the Hollywood leftist elites, the people who are calling for government to fix problems and government to do this, don't realize like what insane level of privilege just having like a savings account is, or a little bit extra is, that can keep people from falling into these issues. Like I got into the argument with Seth Rogan the other day on Twitter about his car getting, like, somebody upset about their car getting stolen and broken into. And he's like, oh, it's happened to me 15 times. You just get used to it. My car's not. I'm like, do you realize how many people in this country live paycheck to paycheck? And if their car got stolen, would be homeless tomorrow?
If my car broke down tomorrow, I would be
Right.
homeless. And matter of fact, my rent is due today, and I am not responding to my landlord until I get my first paycheck from my job, and just hoping he doesn't kick me out. So, like, that's, and a lot, and again, like, this is something I feel the need to bring up too, because it's so egregious. Of, if this conversation was happening in 2019, 2018, something like that, that would be different. But we're having this hobo hate orgy after a year and a half, almost 2 years of lockdown.
And mass unemployment.
And everyone just getting dicked by the government in the most egregious way we've probably ever seen in this country's history, of just every single person, regardless of race, color, whatever, non-targeted, just ball sack across the entire country. And you're going to go now to, like, people like me that lost my business. And I bring up the example of Echo Park in Los Angeles, where it's a newer homeless community that is almost exclusively veterans and lockdown victims, of people that lost their apartment, and, like, because people are still getting evicted, even though there's a victim moratorium, of people that lost their apartment, got kicked out, lost their job, couldn't find work because of COVID, and had to go on the streets. And guess what happened to all those people? You can look up videos of, like, a guy taking his entire apartment, like, Xbox, everything like that, and sitting on the side of the road and living there because he's homeless, and the police coming and bulldozing all of the shit because it's on the street, so it ain't your property anymore, I guess. It's not, we don't care about that property, and did this to fuck tons of people. So, like, you want to have this conversation now? Like, I'm sorry, and maybe you should have fought the lockdowns harder, or maybe you should be, I don't know what to tell you, but, like, that pisses me off, of how the whole reason I even got into the activism around being anti-lockdown was because in Northern Michigan, there was so many people that were desperate. Like, dude, I'm going to lose my house. I'm going to default on my mortgage. My business is going to close down. What the fuck do I do? And that you're talking, like, my small hometown, which is like a gas station, a grocery store, and then one strip with a bunch of small businesses, and then a bar. Bar's gone, grocery store is gone, and the flower shop's gone because of lockdowns. So you're going to come to me now and try to have the discussion now of, like, fuck the bums. And again, though Bishop and Dave Smith weren't that aggressive. So when I go this far, I'm not talking about them. But in the replies, I was taking screenshots of just, like, homelessness is a sign of genetic filth, and we should just run them over. And that, you, like, if somebody's on the park shooting heroin, you should just fucking shoot them. And I'm like, God damn, dude. And again, I don't do the
romanticized. Like, how much, like, it's not insignificant that there are big major pieces of pop culture and American culture today that have romanticized homelessness. Like, I made a Christopher McCandless joke, but Into the Wild romanticized the idea of being the homeless bum that just lives off the land and goes. And, like, it made it
and
seem
everyone
like
forgot that dude fucking died.
Because he misidentified a plant in Alaska.
And it's so funny because people take pilgrimages to the fucking van that he died in and then die. And I'm like, you fucking white people.
But, like,
God damn it.
Like, and I think it's even deeper than that, though. Like, I remember growing up and thinking the one of the most hilarious Chris Farley skits ever. Like, if you don't listen to your parents, you don't do good in school, you don't go get a job, you're going to live in a van down by the river. And growing up, that was a constant. You're going to live in a van down by the river. Homeless is bad, homeless bad. And then when I'm in college and in my early 20s, van life is a thing where the rich and the privileged go out of their way to live in vans down by the river.
Anarcho-bumism, bro. Yeah. It's a cardboard box on the top and then black.
I watched a video because I got into a YouTube rabbit hole and I'm just going down, and I find the van life stuff really interesting because the van life stuff, to me, there's been a lot of innovation and potential off the grid living. And people like me, like, I work remotely. I can work from anywhere. I can make content from anywhere. One of my passions is wildlife photography. I would love to be able to live in a van and just drive across this country doing wildlife photography.
A lot of people would.
Right. It's not actually sustainable when I'm looking at, like, how much does it cost to build a van? $80,000? Okay, so now homelessness is a privilege. Being homeless is a privilege.
Yeah. And I do not agree with these people, to make that perfectly clear. But there was a valid point in with somebody. There was a stupid article where it was like camping is white privilege, or like black people are not allowed to camp or whatever. That's bullshit. But the one good point they made is it is definitely a thing in America where you have rich people will spend thousands upon thousands upon thousands of dollars to simulate the experience of being a bum.
Right.
It's like, yeah, that's a good point, though. Like, I think everything else you said was stupid, but that's a good point.
Right. Like the craziest one I saw, I had to watch it. I got roped into the YouTube rabbit hole and I had to watch the video. They're like, check out this $700,000 RV van. I'm like, why?
My ex-wife was obsessed with that shit, and I don't think she ever fulfilled it because she's a poor just like me. But a old coworker of mine did the same thing. She used to work as a salesman at a jewelry store, big fucking money, quit that job, and now lives in a van and travels around the country and has like $70,000 fucking van or some shit. Like,
the crazy part is, like, a lot of these van life people, their whole like remote work and how they have an income to sustain what they're doing is just making YouTube channels about living in a van.
Yeah, because we all want to get the fuck out of this hell, this Ted Kaczynski nightmare that we live in. Let's we all.
The Industrial Revolution and its consequences were a disaster for the human race.
For real. But again, there's laws and pains and shit with that even. So you run into problems with that even. And I think like it's just gotten to a point, like I said, especially with the lockdown stuff. And what are these going to be these people's opinions when this hyperinflation hits? And you're seeing people get booted out their fucking house left and right. Are you going to treat them as negatively? Like, I don't know if I trust y'all to be good human beings about it. And again, it's not about what Dave said or Tho or anyone who has even if I didn't see Nick's opinion, but if Nick's just like, I literally don't care if someone's homeless. I just don't want someone on drugs in front of my house. That's fine. That's not what we're talking about. I'm talking about a whole bunch of people in the Libertarian Party and Libertarian circles that went mask off and were just like, fuck these dirty, gross, evil fucking people. And it's like,
yeah.
And then people try to gaslight me and say that didn't happen. And I just post like 20 screenshots of fucking people commenting this shit with like some accounts that have like 10K followers and stuff. It's like,
It's wild. And I do think it's important. Spud says it's going to be homeless towns. Good luck with that. I think a homeless town is actually a solution. And they tried that. They tried that in Los Angeles with the tiny homes and the spillway. And it was private charities.
And they got confiscated and destroyed by the government.
The private charities came together. No government action came together to provide tiny homes for homeless people in the spillway, and it got them out of sight. It cleaned up the image, and it gave people a place to sleep, a place to shower, a place to lock up their belongings.
They had volunteers that were going to pick up the area to make it clean so there wasn't garbage. You even had like people that said that you had a couple local police officers that said that they would like patrol the area to make sure things cool. Like everyone was on board.
Right. But, and then the city sent in a bulldozer.
And destroyed all this dude's property and loaded these tiny homes on the back of police cruisers, like trailers, drove them off and fucking destroyed them. Which, again,
I think one of the big issues that people have, though, like I think one of the driving issues with the anger against homelessness and the drive and that's driving the NIMBYism back to the whole people not being able to disconnect, like people with mental health issues, people with economic hardship from the drug addicts and the bums and the losers, is that it's very common that if somebody's homeless long enough for a legitimate reason, they become a drug addict, a bum, and a loser.
Yeah. Like, especially women. Women get sucked into prostitution like a black fucking hole if they're homeless. Constantly. You see it all the time. And then with even men will get sucked into like involuntary sex work or drug running or whatever. And then there is a pipeline to this of, well, you're homeless. Well, now you have to commit crime to live.
Right.
And then you commit crime and now you have a record. And now you're never going to get a job and you're never going to stop being homeless.
So now you're going to do more crime or accept your 3 hots and a cot for life.
Yeah. Or sit on a street corner with a sign and shoot up heroin.
Right.
So it's like,
but that goes back to just another major issue. It's like above and beyond things like zoning laws creating housing shortages, the lockdowns destroying economic opportunities, mass indebtedness from a generation of people being lied to and sold a bill of goods about college education, and then not having an economic opportunity that sustained paying off the debt they have to the United States government for that education, combined with the continued push on the war on drugs and criminalizing addiction and behavior as people are on the streets and seeking any kind of comfort they can. It has created a bubble where the government is not only the problem, the government is the force that's exacerbating its problem, and the government is the force that's attempting to drive support to solve its own problem that it's exacerbated, and it's only making it worse. And libertarians jumping on the Nimby bandwagon and refusing to acknowledge the nuance in the situation. And some of what Dave and Tho said, I agree with, and that's why I asked you. It's like, what do we do now? Like, what can we do?
I do want to. I like because I this entire time I've been like, I'm not addressing what Dave or Tho said. I'm addressing the more evil asshole people. I will address what Tho said about the hostile architecture thing and supporting hostile architecture. If your grandma goes to Grand Central Station now, she has to walk across that entire thing and then stand up and wait for her train because they deemed homeless people sitting down more of a problem than your grandma being able to sit on a bench. Like, so this is you're victimizing innocent people. So I disagree with that.
Like, if you want to build on your private property hostile architecture to dissuade loitering or camping on your private property, again, that's to the root of your property rights argument. Absolutely, go ahead. But the train station is actually a commons. Those train stations are publicly funded and managed entities. Like, there's no private trains in this country anymore.
Right, and like we wanted a lot of people do the appeal to victory or the appeal to the majority kind of thing of like, the reason why libertarians lose is because when someone says, what do we do about the bum, you offer all of this stuff instead of a simple solution, whatever. We got to contextualize that the normies in this situation are the same people that just like a couple of years ago, less than 10 years ago, wanted to ban the kind of comedy that Dave was doing and wanted to kick Eminem off the radio and pull Twisted Sister in front of Congress to talk about banning rock music and shit. Like, these are the same people that supported prohibition. Like, NIMBYism, you do not validate NIMBYism. Like, the reason why I'm here is because we are channeling the Ron Paul energy of standing in front of in a room full of a bunch of people that are like, get rid of the heroin is evil, and Ron Paul being like, fuck that, legalize it, and then drop the mic and walk out. That's supposed to be us. It doesn't matter if it's popular. We're not feeding into these people's terrified delusions and just trying to push the issue under the rug. You know, like, so that's
I do think there is validity to trying to fix the issue in the immediate term. And something that Tho and Dave said that I saw, I'm not sure if you saw it, I don't know the exact words, I'll paraphrase here, but was like, yes, like, when we ask about how to solve these problems, libertarians have all these pie in the sky, like, we recognize the problem, we'll end the drug war, end zoning laws, and go to private charity, that once we reduce and eliminate government, then these things can solve this problem. Okay, but how does that solve the problem now? That's great. When we get there, we can keep this from becoming a problem again. But how do we solve it now within the system and within the framework of the system we live in a way that is both compassionate, empathetic, and respects property rights and human rights all at the same time? Is there a solution that does that? If there is, I myself would be ecstatic to hear it and to start working towards it.
Yeah.
But I don't know what that solution is. And one of the reasons I wanted to have this conversation with you when other people are busy saying blah, 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 is because I feel like you and I come from it at just enough of a different perception, but agree on the major problem, that we can recognize that there is no solution right now.
There is no quick and easy solution. Like, I've brought it up a couple times, but removing the people it doesn't work. We've tried that for 30 years now, of just move the bums away, kick them out, put them somewhere else.
It's only making it worse.
Yeah, people don't evaporate. And also there's no line to it, because let's say, we kick them out of the public, the public spaces. Well, now they go into the private spaces. They're sleeping in your alleyways. They're sleeping behind your garage. They're sleeping in your storefronts, whatever. Okay, you kick them out of there. You kick them out of the entire fucking city, and you kick them out of every single city. Then these same people are going to be like, damn, man, I keep trying to go to the national park, and there's just fucking homeless people everywhere. What do we do about the homeless problem? I think we should remove them from the national parks. Eventually, like I said, you have to acknowledge the slippery slope isn't the right word, but the logical end point of this is you either solve this problem in a hard way that will take time, or lock these people in jail or dump them in the fucking ocean, because otherwise it's not a solution. I'm sorry. That sucks to hear, but like I said, I'm about the hard truths and the hard work, and not the rapid high time preference fucking solution to this. Right. I will beat Hoppians with hop to make them mad. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I mostly agree with you. I do think we need to keep fighting. I do think we need to keep fighting for the true, efficacious, empathetic solution that fixes the problem. And long-term, that's anarchy. Long-term, that's eliminating governmental hierarchies and power structures that disadvantage people and prohibit them from bettering their own situation. I do think we need to find some kind of short-term solution. I'm not sure what that solution is. And I agree with people like Dave and Tho who think there needs to be a solution that we need to work towards. I disagree that solution is remove them, because it needs to be a solution that aligns with our principles.
Yeah. And is it, like I said, and is a solution. Like I could put all of my moralizing behind or whatever. It shouldn't be a complicated argument that if you have a pile of laundry in your house, moving it into the living room doesn't make it to where you don't have a pile of laundry. It just means you no longer have to deal with it, but now it's someone else's problem. So
for most libertarians, I think the problem here is that most libertarians, they take that pile of laundry and move it out of their basement apartment, and their mom will do it for them.
Yes. Yes.
Right.
The neocon light.
This has been fun. This has been a good conversation. This has been a productive conversation. Thank you so much, Magnus, for coming on to do this. Everybody, check out Magnus on Twitter. He's got a new profile because he got zucked.
Always.
Nuked again at Ego and Its Own. I had trouble finding you this morning. You don't show up if I search for you anymore. I think you're already shadow banned on your new account.
Yeah. This account.
Everybody go follow.
this account was shadow banned the moment I made it, because literally the only reason I made it in the first place is I wanted to post really fucking spicy videos that I would retweet on my main account. So that way, if the video is too spicy, then this account would get banned and my main account would be spared. And now it's my main account. But And then I guess the only other plug I have, because I'm not really doing anything on YouTube anymore, is I have a store, conspira-t.com/shop, where I sell anarchy merch and fucking t-shirts and flags and posters and all sorts of stuff. And until my job starts, that's my only source of income. So I appreciate it, everyone who buys stuff. And appreciate you, Justin.
Until next time, everybody, be free. Thanks again for tuning in and joining us tonight. Make sure you hit that like button and leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit that big red subscribe button on YouTube and turn on notifications to get alerted every time we go live. If you enjoyed this content, you can join our production team on Patreon by following the link in the description. And don't forget to follow on social media and join our community Discord channel by following the links in the description as well. The best part of all of this is the community that we're building and growing. So go ahead and join us. And thanks once again to our awesome sponsors and patrons for making all of this possible. And if you can't catch the show live, you can always catch it the next day on YouTube, Odyssey, Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, and wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts. So until next time, everybody, be free.